You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Wednesday, 9th of July 2014. Mark Duggan's family start legal challenge at High Court. Birmingham terrorists. 2 British men who spent 8 months fighting in Syria admit terror offences on UK return. Denmark won't extradite Danish child porn suspect to Lithuania. Norwegian airline opens direct flight from Copenhagen to Bangkok. Dane accused of child sexual abuse released from New York's Rikers Island. Amnesty International says fortress Spain causing misery for migrants. Bahrain, Egyptian woman charged with smoking in the day during Ramadan. Germany destroys Brazil 7-1 in World Cup semi-finals. For the first time, sports news on World at 8. Thought for the day, Coudenhove was a racist, are you? And finally, bizarre or what? UK news. Mark Duggan's family start legal challenge at High Court. The family of Mark Duggan, who was shot dead by police in North London in 2011, have started a legal challenge to have an inquest jury verdict of lawful killing quashed. Lawyers for the family have argued that legal directions given by the coroner were unlawful. His relatives claim the verdict should be replaced with an open conclusion or an order for a fresh inquest. The hearing at the High Court is due to take 2 days. As part of their challenge, the family will argue that the coroner should have directed the jury that they could not return a lawful killing conclusion if they were sure Duggan was not holding a gun. Duggan, 29, was shot in Tottenham. His death led to rioting in the capital, which was replicated in towns and cities across England. World at 8. Typical. Black killed, riots. White killed, silence. I feel another Lawrence moment in the wings. Birmingham terrorists. 2 British men who spent 8 months fighting in Syria admit terror offences on UK return. 2 British men who spent 8 months fighting with rebel groups in Syria have admitted preparing to carry out terrorist attacks. The pair, childhood friends who grew up in Birmingham, were arrested at Heathrow Airport, where they came home in January. Woolwich Crown Court heard that Mohammed Nahin Ahmed and Yusuf Subah Sawar, both 22, had made their way out to the war-torn country explicitly in order to do jihad. West Midlands Police said that while they were in the UK, the pair had carried out research, bought equipment and contacted Islamist extremists before travelling a well-trodden route via Turkey to get inside the battle lines. Tuesday, they each admitted 1 count of engaging in conduct in preparation of terrorism acts contrary to Section 5 of the Terrorism Act. Ahmed, who was born in Bangladesh, moved to Britain as a child, while Sawar, who is of Pakistani descent, was born in Britain. After their arrest, the pair told police that they travelled to Syria for humanitarian reasons. But officers investigating the pair under Operation Handler found thousands of war zone related images of the men with guns on a digital camera carried by the pair into the UK. World at 8. One of the families reported one son missing, not that he had gone abroad to fight. Talk about taking sides. Deport the whole family of both and them back to Bangladesh, or of course Syria. European news. Denmark won't extradite Danish child porn suspect to Lithuania. Lithuanian officials want to see a Danish man brought to justice, but a Danish judge has denied the request. A judge in Glostrup on Tuesday refused to extradite a Danish citizen to Lithuania to face child pornography charges. The District Court of Glostrup's decision came despite the Justice Ministry's stance that it would not stand in the way of the man's extradition, according to Ritzau. The man's lawyer, Bjorn Elmquist, successfully argued that sending the Dane to Lithuania would put him in danger. I presented a valid argument that extradition would go against Article 3 of the European Convention of Human Rights, which prohibits extradition to countries where there is a risk of torture, Elmquist told Ritzau. The man owns a business in the Lithuanian capital of Vilnius and has lived there for years. Lithuanian police arrested the man last summer, saying that he possessed child pornography in his Vilnius home. After being released from the Lithuanian prison Lukitsk, the man fled home to Denmark. According to Britsau, the man was also found guilty of rape by a Lithuanian court, but the Lithuanians are seeking extradition only on the child pornography charge. It is expected that the extradition request will ultimately be decided by the Supreme Court, the Høyesterett. I apologise if I pronounced that one wrong. Norwegian airline opens direct flight from Copenhagen to Bangkok. Travellers will have a new and cheaper option for flying from Copenhagen to the Thai capital, Norwegian Airlines announced on Wednesday. Beginning in October, it will be possible to fly directly from Copenhagen to Bangkok on low-cost airline Norwegian, the company announced. "I'm very pleased that we can offer Danes a direct flight with us between Copenhagen and Bangkok," the airline's CEO Born Joss said in a statement. "Our long-distance flights from Denmark have been very well received, showing that Danes want to fly cheaply and comfortably to overseas destinations." The Bangkok route will join Norwegian's direct offerings from Copenhagen to the US destinations of New York, Los Angeles and Fort Lauderdale. The airline currently flies directly to Bangkok from both Oslo and Stockholm. World date. "It isn't the travel from Copenhagen that would worry me if a Dane, but the travel from Bangkok, which will result in hundreds of Thais coming over and staying in Europe. Not a good move." Dane accused of child sexual abuse released from New York's Rikers Island. The 22-year-old Danish man accused of sexually assaulting 13 children at an upscale Manhattan preschool was granted bail by a New York judge yesterday. The bail was set at $400,000, 2.2 million kroner, and the man was outfitted with an ankle monitoring bracelet and instructed not to leave New York. Rather than sit in custody without the possibility of coming out, now a bond has been set, the man's lawyer Jane Fisher Bryelson told Denmark's radio. His family has the portion they need to give the bail bondsman, so he will get an ankle bracelet and come out on Wednesday. The 22-year-old was being housed in Rikers Island, one of America's most notorious prisons. Due to threats from other inmates, he was moved to solitary confinement. According to his lawyer, the young man was very relieved when he learned he would be released. The man's trial will begin on August the 15th. He is charged with sexually abusing 13 children at a preschool. The school's own internal investigation cleared him of the charges, which were brought about by one former colleague. That woman, a Greek American, has reportedly left the United States. According to DR, the defence lawyer plans to hire a private detective to track her down. Rome, right storm meeting over, civil unions. The politicians of Rome's 13 municipality were yesterday discussing the creation of a civil union register when a group of centre-right councillors along with members of the far right invaded the hall. The protesters were from Silvio Berlusconi's Forza Italian party, the new centre-right NCD led by Interior Minister Angelino Alfano, and the Brothers of Italy FDL party. Despite both Alfano and Berlusconi recently saying they were open to debating civil unions for gay couples, Mancinelli said other municipalities have faced protests over creating a register. The council president would not be deterred, however, saying the meeting will be rescheduled and civil partnerships will probably be discussed at a central city hall soon. Whereas at the moment each of Rome's municipalities make their own rules for civil partnerships, Mancinelli hoped they will soon be centralised so that all citizens can have the same opportunities. The protest was met with ire by Andrea Maccarone, president of the Mario Mili Society for Gay Culture, who praised councillors from the left working in a climate of unjustified political violence. World date. No one on the right objects to people's rights to be with whom they want. It is just the worldwide publicity and media pushings of this subject that offends. Privacy should be the name of the game, as it should be with heterosexual predilections. Amnesty International says fortress Spain causing misery for migrants. The human rights group Amnesty International has criticised Spain for spending 30 times more on defending its borders than on improving the situation of asylum seekers and refugees, the biggest difference in the European Union. Spain spent nearly €300 million on border protection from 2007 to 2013. During the same period, however, it spent just under €10 million on programmes to benefit refugees and asylum seekers. These are the figures cited in a new Amnesty International report on immigration to the EU. The difference between the Spanish two figures was also the largest in the EU, Amnesty International said in its report titled The Human Cost of Fortress Europe: Human Rights Violations Against Migrants or Refugees at Europe's Borders. Europe-wide, the spend was nearly €2 billion on border protection and around €700 million on improving the situation for would-be immigrants. In June, the EU told Spain, the only EU country with land borders with Africa, it would receive €10 million from the European Union to fight illegal immigration in its two North African territories of Ceuta and Melilla. The money would come from the EU's emergency fund and it would be used on some of the 26 projects proposed by Spain to face the situation in Ceuta and Melilla, the EU said in a statement. Spain's Interior Minister on March the 4th estimated that there were 40,000 migrants waiting to cross from Morocco into Ceuta and Melilla. Another 40,000 were waiting to enter Morocco from Mauritania en route to the two cities, he added. World Today: good for Spain. We should adopt this principle throughout Europe before it's too late. Stuff Amnesty. World News: Bahrain. Egyptian woman charged with smoking in the day during Ramadan. A woman has been charged with insulting Ramadan as she smoked a cigarette during daylight hours while she was being questioned at Bahrain International Airport. According to Gulf Daily News, the 32-year-old Egyptian woman, whose name was not disclosed, was stopped by the airport's officers who wanted to search her luggage. As she refused, the officers escorted her to the lieutenant's office for questioning. The woman allegedly insulted the lieutenant, knocked off his hat and then smoked the cigarette. I had a cigarette as I was not fasting because I was travelling, the woman said in her statement to prosecutors. I needed to travel back to my home country for Ramadan and I was late to board my flight. I accidentally knocked off the policeman's hat because I was waving my hands around, trying to explain to him that I was late for my flight and that's why I didn't want a thorough examination of my luggage. As well as smoking a cigarette during daylight hours, the woman was also charged with insulting a police officer. She was released on 500 Bahrain dinar, that is £775 or $1,326 bail by the lower criminal court. The trial was adjourned until July 14th. World date, bless her heart, perhaps she was drunk as well. Germany destroys Brazil 7-1 in World Cup semi-finals. Sport for the first and last time on World at 8. Belo Horizonte, Brazil. With Niemeyer out injured, just about everyone in Brazil knew it would be tough against Germany. The Germans tore apart Brazil's porous defence time and time again on Tuesday, routing the hosts 7-1 in the World Cup semi-finals, the largest margin of defeat at this stage in tournament history. Germany will face either Argentina or the Netherlands on Sunday at the Maracana Stadium in Rio de Janeiro with a chance to win for the fourth time. Brazil was also playing without Neymar, who was ruled out of the tournament with a broken vertebrae after getting kneed in the back in the quarter-final win over Colombia. With Neymar sidelined and Thiago Silva suspended, the Brazilian team just folded from the start as the Germans scored 5 goals in the first 30 minutes, 4 of them in a 6-minute span. Thought for the day: Coudenhove was a racist, but are you? Well, as you can be one of the above or both of the above, but you cannot be none of the above. The reason is simple. You're either for or against your own tribe. It is as simple as that. And if you are for your own tribe or mixtures thereof, you are by virtue of definition a racist. You cannot live in the world, or indeed this country today, and still be on the proverbial fence. It just isn't possible with the best will in the world. Like all the best westerns, I speak from the heart when I say I never used to be what is termed a racist. I lived abroad, had tutoring abroad, and had only the greatest respect for other peoples and tribes. In fact, shock horror, I actually admired them and resented the way that many of our countrymen acted abroad. But now I would have been even more ashamed with the reputation that us Brits have on the continent especially, that of drunkenness, stupidity and desperation. Things have not improved as the lower our standards get at home, the worse they are abroad, and God help the Spanish and Greeks with their tourist trade. No, my tribalist attitude started well into my 30s, when England started to go to hell in a hay basket. You see, it's all the fault of the blurbs and successive governments who have turned me into a mini-me copy of Attila the Hun, bless him. My first husband was Anglo-Indian on his mother's side and I saw no wrong in marrying him, but my half-brother, who had lived in the Far East for years and employed hundreds of locals of all colours and indeed had many close local friends in Singapore, threw his toys and my inheritance out of the window when I did go through with it. So I've suffered somewhat for my stubbornness in the past. In fact, what surprises me is that out of all the many Anglo-Indian entertainers, writers, film stars, etc., they are the ones, far more than the black mixed races, who hide their true cultural inheritance. Few, if any, admit or trumpet their Indianness around, and I find this hypocritical to the extreme. If one adheres not to be a racist, then why hide your own race? Why deny all that culture to your children and friends? I cannot understand it, especially in this day and age when we're all made to view intermarriage as a done deal and a situation with which we should encourage at every titch and turn, and yet the actual process has not changed over the years since the 60s. I grew up in times when a person of colour often passed for white, and to some extent this hasn't changed, when in truth one should not be ashamed of one's differentness. Now you may think this is a complete turnaround, but it isn't. The one factor that annoys and upsets me is that the establishment and media are using race and different ethnicities to recolonise and carry out a huge social restructuring of this country, and they're getting away with it over people's emotions, culture, ethnicity, propaganda and what passes for the anti-racist diatribe. This is so wrong on so many levels for the people of our country and their future. And the worst thing is that by pointing out what is happening, even by giving figures and stats, one is still accused of being a racist or an idiot. And although past my sell-by date, I am hopefully neither. Although unrealistic to expect peoples of any country to stay in that country all their lives, this business of mass immigration from several countries to one country, undertaken for many years, is not realistic in its expectations of how this is to be received by the host country and its peoples. One cannot expect to keep being on the receiving end of millions of total strangers with very foreign cultures and expectations to keep coming until their countries are empty and ours is overfulled and overcrowded. It simply is not viable at all. But that is the way we're expected to react, either with racism on the rise or with indifference or with a frantic mixing of the races, so that when the time comes and all other avenues are shut, what can you do with a totalitarian state peopled with coffee-coloured peoples of no particular religious or ethnic affiliations other than that state? Think about it. The Romans saw it too late. Veni, vidi, vici, I came, I saw and I conquered, and I ain't talking about the Romans. Another interesting point is that whenever I talk about mixed race, we have the inevitable queries on a personal level of someone who has married a West Indian or even a Greek girlfriend. Now even on the level of race, Greeks are Europeans, as are other European nations. Apart from the huge Muslim contingents in their midst, Europeans are of varying shades of white, pink or sallow, and if not mixed bear little resemblance to the mainly African contingents over here who do marry into our culture or lack of it, or at the very least produce copious amounts of mixed race black children from various partners. Fact. When the stats produced from 2011 stated that 1 in 10 in that year, 3 years ago, was in a mixed race partnership, the intimation was black or various degrees of and Asian. And as I said, it's fairly uncommon to have Muslims, Arabs, Chinese or Indians marrying out in this country, but not unknown. This is not a problem. The problem stems from the African or new West Indian communities who have no problem in integrating on this level on a large scale. They can be Christian or Muslim, but they do pose a problem in that if their progeny breed, and they will, we can add that to the Muslim figures and we will be a completely different race of people by the year 2025. You have to remember, all this is planned and encouraged by the Coudenhove-Kalergi cabal and many more, who have been resentful for years over the great in Great Britain and have been determined, along with a lot of help from the media and the pop and celeb cultures, to stamp this particular word out along with our national identities. Coudenhove himself was a half-caste, having an Austrian father and a Japanese mother, so wanted to do away with British imperialism from an early age. Eurasians seem prey to these hatreds more than other mixed race peoples, probably by being looked down on from both the European side and Asian sides, as this is what happened out in the Far East when I was there, and believe me, they were made to feel very uncomfortable in their own skins and in their own countries. This is of course no excuse for changing a population so radically and thoroughly, but what is even more despicable is that the British idea of fair play and fair thinking has been put to a terrible test over the last 3 decades, both by the media and the education systems. We are no longer encouraged to think of England as our home, something to be proud of and fought for. Our families no longer really count. Our Christian religion has been undermined to a degree not seen in the days since the Auto de Fey in Spain, and to cap it all, if anyone sees anything wrong in what's happening in the social and ethnic structure of our country, we are immediately labelled non-progressive and racist, which is worse than being a paedophile, unless you happen to be an old rich white one. That is what I find disgusting in the extreme, that a foreign influence can dominate and take over without so much as a squeal from the people who should be squealing, our MPs, our councils and our government. But the old ones are the best ones. If a government ignores something or supports it, it is not the right thing for England or the UK or you. Numbers do count because they form the opinions of today over the concerns of tomorrow. And finally, better than Agatha Christie, bizarre or what? Anyone wanting to take a shot at the odds of this ever happening again? For those who have served on a jury, this is one to think about. Just when you think you've heard everything. Not even Law and Order would attempt to capture this mess. This is one of those stories which comes under the heading of a twist of fate you wouldn't be able to sell to a book editor. At the 1994 Annual Awards dinner giving for forensic science, President Dr. Don Harper Mills astounded his audience with the legal complications of a bizarre death. Now here is the story. On March the 23rd, 1994, the medical examiner viewed the body of Ronald Opus and concluded that he died from a shotgun wound to the head. Mr. Opus had jumped from the top of a 10-storey building intending to commit suicide. He left a note to that effect indicating his despondency. As he fell past the 9th floor, his life was interrupted by a shotgun blast passing through a window which killed him instantly. Neither the shooter nor the deceased was aware that a safety net had been installed just below the 8th floor level to protect some building workers, and that Ronald Opus would not have been able to complete his suicide the way he had planned. The room on the 9th floor where the shotgun blast emanated was occupied by an elderly man and his wife. They were arguing vigorously and he was threatening her with a shotgun. The man was so upset that when he pulled the trigger, he completely missed his wife and the pellets went through the window, striking Mr. Opus. When one intends to kill subject A but kills subject B in an attempt, one is guilty of the murder of subject B. When confronted with a murder charge, the old man and his wife were both adamant and both said that they thought the shotgun was not loaded. The old man said it was a long-standing habit to threaten his wife with an unloaded shotgun. He had no intention to murder her. Therefore the killing of Mr. Opus appeared to be an accident, that is, assuming the gun had been accidentally loaded. The continuing investigation turned up a witness who saw the old couple's son loading the shotgun about 6 weeks prior to the fatal accident. It transpired that the old lady had cut off her son's financial support, and the son, knowing the propensity of his father to use the shotgun threateningly, loaded the gun with the expectation that his father would shoot his mother. Since the loader of the gun was aware of this, he was guilty of the murder, even though he didn't actually pull the trigger. The case now becomes one of murder on the part of the son for the death of Ronald Opus. Now comes the exquisite twist. Further investigations revealed that the son was in fact Ronald Opus. He had become increasingly despondent over the failure of his attempt to engineer his mother's murder. This led him to jump off the 10-storey building on March the 23rd, only to be killed by a shotgun blast passing through the 9th-storey window. The son, Ronald Opus, had actually murdered himself. So the medical examination closed the case as suicide. A true story from Associated Press. You couldn't write it, could you? You've been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynn Mozart and I wish you all a very good night.